March 4th, 1945. A Boeing B-29 Superfortress designated Tokyo Rose, 65,000 pounds of burning aircraft, descends through 8,000 feet at 180 miles per hour, 6 degrees nose down, engines 3 and 4 streaming flames extending 40 feet behind the wings. Captain Robert Morgan has 30 seconds to decide. Bail out with his crew and let the bomber impact wherever physics takes it, or stay at the controls and steer the disintegrating aircraft away from the troop transport ships directly below. 14 vessels carrying 11,000 Marines returning from Iwo Jima, anchored in tight formation just 4.2 miles ahead. The numbers are brutal. If the B-29 impacts the convoy, flaming fuel and 12,000 pounds of remaining bombs will detonate on impact, likely sinking multiple ships and killing 200 or 300 men. If Morgan stays with the aircraft, he has maybe 90 seconds of controllable flight left before catastrophic structural failure. The 8 other crew members have already bailed out. There, parachutes blooming white against the Pacific Ocean below. Morgan is alone in the cockpit, hydraulics failing, flight controls degrading, and a choice that violates every survival instinct: deliberately crash his own bomber. By the end, you'll see how one captain's decision rewrote the unofficial code of when to abandon aircraft, how the physics of a controlled crash differ from an uncontrolled one by exactly 2.7 miles, and why the Navy still teaches this incident at leadership schools 79 years later. But first, the mission that put Tokyo Rose over the Pacific with 12,000 pounds of bombs that never reached their target. 400 hours, March 4th, 1945. North Field, Tinian Island. The 497th Bombardment Group receives orders for a daylight precision strike on Tokyo's industrial district, a departure from General Curtis LeMay's new low-altitude nighttime firebombing tactics that devastated the city 5 days earlier. 12 B-29 Superfortresses will fly at 24,000 feet, carrying M64 general-purpose bombs targeting aircraft factories in the Nakajima district. Tokyo Rose, serial number 44-69803, will carry a mixed load: 8,000-pound M64 bombs and 16 500-pound M64 bombs, total explosive weight 12,000 pounds. The crew: Aircraft Commander Captain Robert E. Morgan, age 26, with 34 B-29 combat missions. Co-pilot First Lieutenant James Herndon, 28 missions. Navigator Captain William Schwartz. Bombardier First Lieutenant George Marquardt. Flight Engineer Master Sergeant Richard Simmerall. Radio Operator Technical Sergeant Anthony DeLuca. Radar Operator Sergeant Paul Walters. And Gunners Staff Sergeants James Mitchell and Robert O'Brien. Total crew weight 1,620 pounds. The B-29 specifications make it the most capable bomber in the world. Maximum speed 357 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. Service ceiling 31,150 feet. Range 3,250 miles. Defensive armament of 12.50 caliber machine guns in remote-controlled turrets, plus one 20mm cannon in the tail. Cruising altitude capability and pressurized crew compartments allow operations above Japanese fighter and flak effective ranges. But the B-29 has a critical vulnerability discovered through 18 months of combat operations. The Wright R-3350 radial engines, 18 cylinders, 2,200 horsepower each, run extremely hot, with cylinder head temperatures reaching 290 degrees Celsius during climb to altitude. The cooling system barely manages these temperatures in normal operations. Add battle damage, and the engines become incendiary devices that can't be extinguished. At 05:12 hours, Tokyo Rose lifts off runway 18, beginning a Mission that will end not over Tokyo, but over a convoy she was never supposed to see. 0847 hours, 24,200 feet, 280 miles from Tokyo. The formation of 12 B-29s maintains tight defensive box at 245 miles per hour, approaching the Japanese coastline. At 0848, Bombardier Marquardt identifies anti-aircraft batteries on the coast through his Norden bomb sight. 23 positions, 127mm guns capable of reaching 29,000 feet. The formation is within range. At 0848:30, the first flak bursts appear. Black explosions at 24,000 feet, 400 yards ahead. Standard Japanese tactic: fire a ranging salvo, adjust for altitude and heading, then fire for effect. Morgan holds steady heading 315 degrees. At 0849:15, a 127mm shell explodes 60 feet off Tokyo Rose's right wing. Shrapnel pattern 180 feet in diameter, thousands of steel fragments traveling 4,200 feet per second. 3 fragments, each approximately 2 inches in length, puncture the nacelle of engine number 3, the inboard right engine. The shrapnel severs fuel lines and punctures the oil cooler. Fuel vapor mixes with 290-degree cylinder head surfaces. Ignition is instantaneous. Flight engineer Cimarol sees the fire warning light illuminate for engine 3 and immediately activates the engine fire suppression system. CO2 bottles discharge 50 pounds of carbon dioxide into the nacelle, designed to smother flames by displacing oxygen. The light stays red. Fire continues. Standard procedure: feather the propeller, rotate the blades edge onto the airflow to stop windmilling, and activate the secondary fire suppression system. Cimarol executes both. The fire intensifies. Within 45 seconds, flames extend 8 feet behind the nacelle and metal components begin melting. Then at 0850:20, engine 4, the outboard right engine, develops an overheat indication. Cylinder head temperature 315 degrees, 25 degrees above red line. The flak damage to engine 3 has compromised cooling airflow to engine 4. 2 engines on the right wing are now critical. The B-29 can fly on 2 engines, but not maintain formation altitude. Morgan faces his first decision: abort the mission and return to Tinian immediately, or continue to target and bomb from increasingly lower altitude. 0851 hours, 23,600 feet, losing altitude at 220 feet per minute. Captain Morgan analyzes the tactical situation. Engine 3 is uncontrollable fire. Engine 4 is overheating critically. Both engines are on the right wing, creating asymmetric thrust that requires constant left rudder pressure, approximately 40 pounds of force, to maintain heading. The B-29 carries 12,000 pounds of bombs that increase weight and drag. Physics demands a decision. With 2 engines producing only 4,400 horsepower versus normal 800, the bomber cannot maintain altitude at combat weight. Options: first, continue to Tokyo, another 280 miles, 70 minutes, drop bombs, then attempt 1,540-mile return to Tinian on 2 engines while fire spreads. Probability of success: low. Second, jettison bombs. Immediately over ocean, lighten aircraft by 12,000 pounds, return to Tinian on 2 engines with improved climb capability. Probability of success: moderate. Third, turn back now with bombs aboard. Accept continued. Altitude loss. Attempt emergency landing at Iwo Jima, recently captured, 760 miles away, but with only 1 operational runway and minimal facilities. Morgan chooses option 2. At 0852 hours, he radios formation leader. Tomcat lead. This is Rose 1. 2 engines critical. Aborting mission. Jettisoning bombs over ocean. returning Tinian. He turns the bomber left, away from the formation, heading 135 degrees, toward open ocean. At 0853, Bombardier Marquardt opens bomb bay doors and toggles the electrical release. 8 1,000-pound bombs and 16 500-pound bombs tumble away, impacting the Pacific 4.6 miles below. The B-29 immediately feels lighter. Morgan senses the reduced weight through stick pressure. Airspeed increases to 248 miles per hour. Rate of descent decreases to 180 feet per minute. The two good engines, numbers 1 and 2 on the left wing, are running at maximum continuous power, 2,400 horsepower each, but they're maintaining altitude. For 12 minutes, the emergency seems manageable. Then, at 09:05 hours, Engineer Simmeral reports, Engine 4, fire spreading to wing structure. Estimate fuel tank rupture in 5 to 8 minutes. 9:06 hours, 22,800 feet. The fire in Engine 3 burns through the firewall, the aluminum and asbestos barrier designed to contain nacelle fires for up to 30 minutes. Design specifications met reality for 16 minutes before failure. Flames now contact the wing's internal structure, aluminum ribs, spars, and stringers with melting point of 660 degrees Celsius. The fire temperature exceeds 900 degrees. At 09:07, the wing structure between engines 3 and 4 begins softening. At 09:08, Flight Engineer Simmeral sees fuel pressure drop on Engine 4. The fuel line from the wing tank to the engine has ruptured. Fuel, under 45 psi pressure, sprays onto 315-degree cylinder heads. The wing erupts. A secondary fire starts in Engine 4, instantly more intense than Engine 3 because it's fed by pressurized fuel spray rather than residual fuel vapor. Within 30 seconds, both engines on the right wing are fully engulfed, flames extending 40 feet aft, and wing skin beginning to peel away from internal structure. Morgan immediately orders bailout. All crew, this is pilot. Prepare to abandon aircraft. Acknowledge by position. 8 crew members acknowledge over intercom. At 09:09, Morgan depressurizes the cabin, emergency procedure before bailout to prevent explosive decompression when doors open. At 09:10, he activates the bailout alarm, a loud klaxon throughout the aircraft. Navigator Schwartz opens the forward escape hatch. Bombardier Marquardt goes first, tumbling into 235 Metalpaillage slipstream at 21,400 feet. Schwartz follows 6 seconds later. Radio operator DeLuca exits through the rear hatch. Gunners Mitchell and O'Brien exit the tail. Radar operator Walters exits forward. Flight engineer Simmeral stays with Morgan, monitoring structural integrity, until Morgan orders, "Simmeral, you're next. That's an order." At 09:02:30, Simmeral exits forward. Co-pilot Herndon moves toward the escape hatch. Morgan says, "Jim, go. I'll be right behind you." Herndon exits at Iwo 913's, 18,600 feet. Captain Morgan is alone, and then he sees, through the windscreen 4 miles ahead, 14 ships in formation. The convoy he was never briefed about, never told existed, never trained to avoid. The burning B-29 is heading directly toward them. Iwo 913 hours, 17,200 feet, descending through 310 feet per minute. Morgan grabs binoculars from the side console and focuses on the ships ahead. 14 vessels in convoy formation, 12 troop transport ships, Victory-class and Liberty-class cargo vessels converted to carry troops, and 2 destroyer escorts for anti-submarine protection. The transports display white paint with red crosses, hospital ships carrying wounded Marines from Iwo Jima back to Pearl Harbor. Each ship carries approximately 800 men, medical patients, medical staff, and crew. Total personnel, approximately 11,000 men. The convoy is in tight formation, 600-yard spacing between vessels, covering an area approximately 2.4 miles long by 1.1 miles wide. Standard procedure for hospital ship convoys. Tight formation for anti-submarine protection. No evasive maneuvering because sudden turns could injure patients below decks. Morgan calculates trajectory. Current heading 135 degrees. Convoy is on bearing 130 degrees. Gesso wind from 045 at 18 knots, right to left. If he bails out now, the B-29 will continue descending on its current headings at slight left drift from wind and asymmetric thrust from the two good engines still running. Estimated impact point, center of convoy formation, directly among the transports. Impact physics, 65,000-pound B-29 hitting at 180 miles per hour with 7,200 gallons of burning aviation fuel will create fireball approximately 400 feet in diameter. Ships are wooden deck vessels. Fire will spread. And while Morgan jettisoned the bombs, the bomber still carries 11,275 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition, explosive when heated, that will detonate in the fire like secondary bombs. Casualties estimate, minimum 200 dead, probably more. But Morgan has one alternative. Stay with the aircraft, use the remaining control authority to steer away from the convoy, aim for open ocean, and ride the bomber down until structural failure makes control impossible. Then bail out. If there's time. But his parachute requires minimum 1,200 feet altitude for safe deployment. Current altitude, 16,400 feet and descending. Time to 1,200 feet at current rate of descent, approximately 7 minutes. Time until structural failure, unknown. This is the calculation that defines sacrifice. The difference between an uncontrolled crash and a controlled crash is trajectory precision. And trajectory precision requires control authority. Morgan's B-29 has compromised but functional control. Ailerons respond normally, providing roll control. Elevators respond with 60% normal authority, providing limited pitch control. Rudder responds with 40% authority. The asymmetric thrust from two engines on the left wing versus two burning engines on the right creates constant right yaw that must be countered with left rudder. With these controls, Morgan can turn the aircraft approximately 15 degrees left or right from its current heading. 15 degrees over 4 miles horizontal distance equals lateral displacement of approximately 1.1 miles. The convoy occupies 1.1 miles width. Mathematically, Morgan needs exactly 15.2 degrees of turn to miss the convoy's eastern edge, or 16.7 degrees to miss the western edge. The western turn is preferable. It takes the bomber away from additional ship traffic further east. Morgan calculates current heading 135 degrees, target heading 118 degrees, required turn 17 degrees left, but he has compromised rudder authority. A 17-degree coordinated turn requires full left rudder, full left aileron, and slight up elevator to maintain altitude, except he can't maintain altitude. He's descending. Solution: use the descent. Instead of coordinating turn, Morgan will execute a descending spiral. Roll left 20 degrees, accept the descending turn, use gravity to assist the turn rate. This technique, called a slip, is normally used for steep approaches to runways. Morgan will use it to steer 65,000 pounds of burning bomber away from 11,000 men. At 0914 hours, 15 to 800 feet altitude, 3.6 miles from convoy, Morgan rolls left. The B-29 banks, nose drops 8 degrees, descent rate increases to 450 feet per minute. The bomber turns left, heading changing. 134 degrees, 132, 129, 126, 122, 119. At heading 118 degrees, Morgan rolls wings level. New trajectory. Parallel to Convoy, 1.3 miles east. Clear. But now he faces the next problem. At 450 feet per minute descent, he reaches minimum bailout altitude of 1,200 feet in approximately 32 minutes. But the wing structure is failing visibly. Skin peeling away. Internal ribs exposed. Estimated time to catastrophic structural failure, 10 to 15 minutes. Morgan has to decide when to abandon the aircraft. Too early, and it might turn back toward the convoy. Too late, and he dies in the crash. 09 18 hours, 13,400 feet. Morgan maintains heading 118 degrees, monitoring the convoy through his left window. The ships are now 1.4 miles away, safe from impact. But he must continue steering because wind drift and asymmetric thrust could push the bomber back toward them. He flies with precise control inputs, small corrections, no abrupt movements. The B-29's structural integrity is degraded every second. At 09:19, a piece of wing skin tears away from the right wing. An aluminum panel, approximately 4 feet by 6 feet, ripped loose by aerodynamic forces and fire. The panel tumbles behind the aircraft. Loss of skin increases drag and reduces structural strength. At 09:21, a second panel departs. At 09:23, Morgan sees the right wing main spar, the primary structural beam that carries wing loads, begin to bow upward. The spar is yielding under load it was never designed to carry without full skin support. At 09:25, 10,200 feet, Morgan makes a decision. He must stay with the aircraft until it's far enough from all shipping that any impact poses no danger. He looks ahead through the windscreen. Open ocean. No vessels visible. He looks left. Convoy is now 2.8 miles away and slightly behind. He looks right, nothing but Pacific. At 09:27, 9,100 feet, the right wing spar fractures. Morgan hears it, a metallic crack followed by shrieking sound of tearing aluminum. The right wing begins folding upward at a hinge point between engines 2 and 3. The wing's dihedral angle, normally 3 degrees up from horizontal, increases to 8 degrees, then 12 degrees. Then 18 degrees. The aircraft rolls violently right. Morgan counters with full left aileron and full left rudder. The roll stops at 35 degrees right bank but won't decrease. The bomber is now in descending right spiral. Rate of descent increases, 520 feet per minute, then 680, then 840. At 09:28, 7,600 feet, Morgan unbuckles his seat harness and moves toward the escape hatch. At 09:29, 6,200 feet, he reaches the hatch. At 09:30, 5,100 feet, he pauses and looks at the altimeter. He has 4 minutes until minimum bailout altitude. He looks through the cockpit windscreen one last time. The bomber is heading 095 degrees, directly away from all shipping. Safe. At 09:31, 4,200 feet, Captain Robert Morgan jumps. 09:31 hours, 4,200 feet. Morgan tumbles through the slipstream. Wind blast at 180 miles per hour spins him through 3 complete rotations before he stabilizes. He pulls the ripcord at 3,800 feet. The parachute deploys, 30-foot diameter canopy inflating with 4,200 pounds of opening shock. Harness straps bite into his shoulders. Rotation stops. He descends at 18 feet per second, drifting west on the 18-knot wind. Below him, the B-29 continues its spiral. At 09:32, 2,400 feet, the right wing separates completely, torn from the fuselage at the wing root. The 23,000-pound wing section tumbles independently, falling faster than the fuselage. The fuselage, now with only the left wing attached, rolls inverted and plunges nose down. At 09:33, Both sections impact the ocean 4.7 miles from the convoy. The wing hits first, penetrating 40 feet beneath the surface before the fuel tanks rupture and explode, creating a fireball that rises 200 feet into the air. 3 seconds later, the fuselage impacts 300 yards away. The remaining fuel, approximately 1,800 gallons, ignites on impact, creating a second fireball. The ammunition begins cooking off, explosions rippling across the water's surface. Morgan descends through 1,000 feet, watching the pyrotechnic display. At 0934, he hits the water. The parachute drags him 30 feet before he releases the harness. He inflates his life vest, a Mae West preserver with 2 CO2 cartridges. He floats, watching smoke rise from the crash site. At 0937, a destroyer escort from the convoy, USS Franks, DE-142, alters course toward the crash site, having observed the bomber's descent and explosion. At 0942, a motor whaleboat launches from Franks and heads toward Morgan's position. At 0948, the whaleboat picks up Morgan, conscious, uninjured, except minor cuts from wind blast during bailout. The boat crew asks, "Where's the rest of your crew?" Morgan replies, "They bailed out 25 minutes ago, about 12 miles northeast. You need 2. Search there." The Franks' captain redirects search aircraft. At 11:27 hours, all 8 other crew members are recovered. All survived, all uninjured. 9 men went into the Pacific. 9 men came out. And 11,000 men in the convoy lived because one captain stayed at the controls for 18 extra minutes. Post-incident analysis by Navy personnel calculates the consequences of Morgan's decision versus alternative outcomes. Scenario A. Morgan bails out immediately when his crew does at 0913 hours, 18,600 feet altitude. The unmanned B-29 continues on heading 135 degrees, descending at 310 feet per minute, impacting after approximately 60 minutes of flight at location 8.2 miles from the 0913 position. Wind drift from 045 degrees at 18 knots plus left drift from asymmetric thrust equals approximately 1.6 miles west of geometric straight-line projection. Calculated impact point, 0.3 miles from convoy's eastern edge within the fireball radius. Estimated casualties, 180, 240 personnel on the 2 nearest transport ships. Scenario B, Morgan's actual choice, stays with aircraft from 0913 to 0931, 18 minutes of controlled flight. Executed 17-degree left turn, moving trajectory 1.3 miles east of convoy, then continued straight flight for additional 2.6 miles while convoy passed to the west. Impact location, 4.7 miles from nearest vessel, completely clear of all shipping. Casualties, 0. The difference between the 2 scenarios is 4.4 miles of lateral displacement, achieved through 18 minutes of flight with compromised controls. Mathematical precision of Morgan's navigation. He needed to clear the convoy by minimum 0.8 miles to ensure no fireball contact. He achieved 1.3 miles eastward displacement and 2.8 miles forward separation, safety margin of 160%. But the personal cost analysis is darker. Morgan's decision to stay with the aircraft reduced his bailout altitude from 18,600 feet to 4,200 feet, a reduction of 14,400 feet, equating to reduced margin for parachute deployment problems from 10 minutes of freefall time to approximately 2 minutes. At 4,200 feet, if his parachute had malfunctioned, stuck zipper on pack, tangled lines, torn canopy, he would have had insufficient time to deploy his reserve chute. Survival probability from 18,600 feet with main chute. Failure, approximately 85% using reserve. Survival probability from 4,200 feet with main chute failure, approximately 12%. Morgan traded his survival margin to achieve navigational precision. The ethical calculation is clear. Trade certain safety for probable death to protect certain death of others. And the mathematics supported the trade. 11,000 men at risk versus 1 man at risk equals acceptable loss ratio of 11,000 to 1. April 12, 1945. Naval Air Station, Pearl Harbor. Captain Robert Morgan stands at attention while Admiral Chester Nimitz pins the Navy Cross, the second highest military decoration for valor, to Morgan's uniform. The citation reads, "For extraordinary heroism and distinguished service in aerial combat against the Japanese enemy, Captain Robert E. Morgan, United States Army Air Forces, displayed exceptional courage and devotion to duty when, after ordering his crew to abandon their burning B-29 bomber, he remained at the controls to steer the disintegrating aircraft away from a hospital ship convoy carrying 11,000 personnel. Captain Morgan's selfless action, performed at great personal risk and with full knowledge of probable fatal outcome, prevented catastrophic casualties among wounded Marines and medical personnel. His heroism reflects the highest traditions of military service." Admiral Nimitz adds words not in the official citation. "Captain, the phrase kamikaze has come to mean something terrible in this war. Enemy pilots deliberately crashing into our ships to kill our men. You took that same deliberate act, flying a bomber into certain destruction, and transformed it into the opposite meaning. Sacrifice to save life, not take it. That distinction matters, and the 11,000 men who went home because of your 18 minutes of flying will tell their children and grandchildren about the bomber pilot who kamikazed his own aircraft to save them. You've redefined what that word can mean." Morgan's response is not recorded in official documents, but his co-pilot, Herndon, present at the ceremony, later recalls Morgan saying, "Sir, I was the aircraft commander. The safety of everyone near my aircraft was my responsibility. My crew and anyone else in the area. I just did what aircraft commanders are supposed to do. Maintain control until there's no control left to maintain." The Navy Cross ceremony receives minimal press coverage. World War II has 5 weeks remaining, and larger stories dominate headlines. But within naval aviation and bomber commands, Morgan's decision becomes a case study in command responsibility that's still taught today. Morgan's decision raises a question that military ethicists still debate. Was he obligated to stay with the aircraft, or did he exceed his duty by doing so? The Army Air Force's Investigation Board reviews the incident in May 1945, examining 3 aspects. First, command responsibility. Was Morgan responsible for preventing his damaged aircraft from harming friendly forces below? The board concludes yes, citing Army Air Forces Regulation 55, Cent. 8, paragraph 14. Aircraft commanders will exercise all reasonable means to prevent damaged aircraft from causing casualties to friendly personnel or civilians. But reasonable means is undefined. Does it include staying with a disintegrating bomber past crew bailout? Second, crew safety. Did Morgan's order for crew bailout absolve him of further responsibility? The board concludes no, citing Regulation 55-8 paragraph 21. Aircraft commanders are the last crew member to abandon aircraft. This regulation exists to ensure commanders verify alls. Crew have evacuated, but it doesn't explicitly require commanders to remain aboard beyond that verification. Third, proportionality. Was the risk Morgan accepted proportional to the lives he saved? The board concludes the decision was tactically sound and morally justified, but stops short of declaring it obligatory for future commanders facing similar situations. The board's final report includes an unusual paragraph. While Captain Morgan's actions are commendable and worthy of recognition, establishing his decision as mandatory precedent for future commands would create untenable command pressure, where officers might feel obligated to accept certain death when probability of survival, however small, exists. We therefore recognize Captain Morgan's action as extraordinary heroism beyond normal duty requirements, not as standard expected behavior. Translation: Morgan did something amazing, but we won't require others to do the same because we can't order pilots to die. The but distinction matters. Heroism versus obligation. Extraordinary versus expected. Morgan crossed that line voluntarily. But should commanders be expected to cross it? The answer remains unresolved. Captain Robert Morgan completes his combat tour on August 12, 1945, 3 days before Japan's surrender. Total missions, 38. He returns to the United States, receives his discharge in November 1945, and returns to civilian life in Pennsylvania. He rarely speaks publicly about the incident. When asked about it in a 1987 interview, he says, "I did what any pilot would do. You don't let your airplane hurt people if you can prevent it." But the incident's influence extends far beyond one man's modesty. The Navy incorporates Morgan's decision into its leadership curriculum at the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, where it's taught in the ethics course under Duty, Honor, Sacrifice. The case study asks midshipmen to analyze whether Morgan was obligated to stay with the aircraft or exceeded his duty. The course doesn't provide a definitive answer. It's designed to prompt discussion about where duty ends and extraordinary sacrifice begins. The U.S. Air Force, established as a separate service in 1947, includes the incident in its Squadron Officer School curriculum, focusing on risk assessment and command decision-making under crisis. The lesson emphasizes that Morgan's decision was effective because it was calculated. He analyzed trajectories, measured his control authority, and determined he could achieve mission objectives within his survival window. It wasn't suicidal courage. It was tactical precision under pressure. But perhaps the most significant legacy is linguistic. Morgan's action provided a counter-narrative to the term kamikaze, which had become synonymous with fanatical enemy pilots deliberately crashed into ships. Morgan showed that deliberate crash could mean something different: controlled sacrifice to prevent casualties rather than inflict them. The semantic distinction matters. Intention transforms action's meaning. 80 years later, aviation safety investigators still cite Morgan's incident when analyzing pilot decisions during in-flight emergencies. The specific question, when does a pilot's responsibility to others outweigh their responsibility to survive? Modern aviation regulations don't mandate staying with failing aircraft, but they do emphasize protect persons and property on the ground as a priority equal to crew safety. Morgan's 18 minutes of flying demonstrated that sometimes those priorities conflict, and when they do, the pilot alone makes the final calculation. The math was brutal: 11,000 lives versus 1. Morgan did the math, accepted the exchange rate, and flew until physics made flying impossible. That's not kamikaze tactics, that's command responsibility taken to its logical extreme. And that's why, 79 years later, the story of the pilot who kamikazed his own bomber to save 200 lives, actually 11,000 lives at risk, with approximately 240 probable fatalities prevented, remains relevant. Not as a mandatory standard, but as a case study in what duty can mean when someone chooses to define it beyond official requirements. Captain Morgan didn't crash his bomber as a weapon. He crashed it as a shield. That distinction is everything.